So thank you for joining us today. Would you mind telling me your name, your year, and your major?
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Kathy Yuan, and I'm actually a graduated senior. I majored in educational studies and minored in biology, and I'm really excited to share this piece.
Cool. And could you tell me very quickly what the piece was that you submitted and maybe what class it was for?
So I actually studied language and culture in France while I was abroad in my final year. And in my French gastronomy course, we looked at something popularized as the French paradox, which is an observation of how French people manage to eat higher fat, higher cholesterol diets than Americans while also living longer and healthier lives. Seems like seemingly immune to the overweight and cardiovascular disease that exists as a result of a similar diet here. And in my research for the course, I challenged the previous literature about the paradox through a scientific and sociocultural lens, and I identified what I saw as a hidden foundational structure. I talk about this as an eating regimen that facilitates more obvious dilemmas about our differing eating behaviors. And to me, those eating regimens operate as identity models, the ways that we as humans reinsert order into our post-industrial society through the act of eating. And I basically say that France's eating regimen is one of social eating, which places high value on the experience of eating, and the US's eating regimen is one of nutritious eating, which emphasizes the consequences of eating.
Cool. Thank you for that summary. It was a really interesting paper when I read it. So to shift gears slightly, let's talk, I want to ask about your writing process generally. So if you could you describe what your process is like, and in particular, how you go about drafting and revising a piece and when you know that a piece is finished?
Okay, so my writing process at the time was actually I think it was like the best circumstances possible. I was living in a host family where I had a lot of free time, free will, and I gave myself basically like a month in the time that I needed to really write this paper. And I had physical, like all my articles just sitting in like a pile of papers every day with my highlighters and my pencils and like three different notes about the things I wanted to pull. I started off with like a synthesis that helped me organize the ideas I had and then concentrate where I was trying to focus on. And I wrote in like an app that clears distractions from your screen. I wrote in Word to like see what it finally looked like. I wrote in Google Docs so I could research side by side. I kind of do everything, and I do it like very intensely for a very long time. And eventually there's like a point when I feel like I filled the nature of what I need to write to, and I just start cutting. As an editor, I try and cut as much as possible to get to the point which the final version that you read was actually like just a portion of what I submitted. So believe it or not, that is after a lot of editing. But I think it feels done after I read it for about like the 3,000th time, and I feel as if everything I want to talk about is represented well. And if I were a reader with no exposure to it and were reading it for the first time, that I would be able to walk away with like an appreciation of the background research that was inherent in the writing of the paper, and also some questions about now like what I'm thinking because of it.
Cool. I completely agree. Thank you for that. So when you were writing this piece, how did you select the topic that you ended up writing about? And how do you select topics generally when you're writing?
Oh, well, speaking to this piece, I actually had an experience very early on when I arrived in France. I was reading, like, I don't know, I want to say like a label for cheese that was in the house because it seems like something that would have happened. Either way, I noticed very quickly that the first piece of information at like the top of the nutrition label, it's energy, Energie, the French translation for energy. And at first I thought like, oh, like how fun, like energy, calories, I know that because science. But also I wonder if maybe I'm missing something and this isn't just like a direct translation of the word. Maybe they have a better conception of food than us and they just call it energy because they really know what it means.
Yeah.
And then I looked it up and it turns out that there's nothing deeper than that. It's just straight up the translation. And I was thinking about how life might be different if we also grew up stateside looking at nutrition labels that said energy for like the amount of calories,
Yeah.
because like every other value in the French table, the units are side by side. It's kilojoules and then kcal and calories. So it's very obvious that calories are a unit, that energy is a unit.
Mhm.
Whereas on US labels, you see calories 180, 300, and there's no units. It's very bizarre now that you think about it.
Yeah.
And so all we know about the idea of calories is that it's a number and it gets large and we don't like the large ones. And then I asked, like, it's so evident. It's crazy to think about some of the colloquialisms that we have, that we're talking in life. And how often do you hear, like, I can't eat that, I'm cutting calories, like, oh my God, it has so many calories. That's like, I can't have that. But if
Mhm.
you were to say that and translate it from French, you'd just be saying, like, I'm cutting energy. I can't eat this. It has too much energy. And it'd be so ridiculous. Like, you
Yeah.
would have to find a new way to
Yeah.
formulate that idea.
Mhm.
And so that engenders like a lot of questions about what the nature of our dieting culture and our perceptions about food and nutrition would seem like based on just this one word, which is really important for a lot of the people who are worried about their health. They're
Yeah.
told to, like, think about the calories constantly.
Yeah. And that actually transitions nicely to a specific question I had about your piece, which is, so you mentioned the anecdote with like potentially maybe it was like a cheese packaging that you'd seen
Mhm.
like early. So one of the things that you analyze in your paper, I think, is you analyze cereal nutrition facts, like U.S. versus French, I think, cereals or
Yeah.
something like that. How did you decide to, or why did you decide to analyze that, and how do you think it helped advance your argument?
I was looking for something that would be a common item in both French supermarkets and US ones, something that everyone has access to and is probably looked at in their day-to-day life.
Mhm.
And so in Europe, I found that that was muesli, like just their version of a cereal, a breakfast thing.
Yeah.
And it's very simple because I think we understand most of the ingredients or most of the idea. It's just a very simple concept to work from. But what was highlighted and easy to see to help my argument is that on the US label, you've got the ingredients and they've bolded, the whole grain oats, cornstarch, sugar, salt, and you've got like a long list of vitamin A, vitamin C through like Z with like zinc, magnesium, and some of it's like 5%, 2%, but it's there and it's
Yeah.
very long. Whereas on the French version of the label, you have their nutrition facts, which is like the calories, fats, carbs, fiber, protein, salt, and that's like it. And
Yeah.
then in their ingredients list, what differs is that when they list each individual ingredient, they also list the percentage that that forms, which we don't do in the US. And I saw that a lot during my time there, that they would often do, the grain 60%. And I used that actually in a project that wasn't included in this paper.
Mhm.
And I kind of tried to investigate the associations that we would have as nutritionally conscious eaters versus socially conscious ones. I found that eaters in France are very concerned with where their food comes from and the quality of the food that they're eating. And so
Yeah.
it makes sense that they want to know how much of this ingredient is the good one and how much of this ingredient is coming from something that I deem acceptable. Whereas in the US, a lot of the people I interviewed were more focused on like, well, is there a lot of calcium and is there protein? They don't really care where it comes from. They want to know what they're getting out of it.
Yeah.
And so that was a very good example of the different ways that our separate eating regimens manifest and the ways that we buy food, we look at food, we think about food and experience it being given to us as consumers.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and I really liked your inclusion of that. It really helped flesh out your argument.
Thank you.
So to change gears again for this very last question, a lot of writers struggle writing introductions and conclusions to
Mhm.
pieces. How do you handle those two hurdles in the writing process?
I think the introduction is for me probably the easiest part because whenever I write a piece, I have an idea of what I want to write about. The
Mhm.
introduction just tells you why I'm writing about it. It's very
Yeah.
straightforward. You have your thesis, you have to be very straightforward, very concise. For me, it's easy because it's like very factual,
Mhm.
especially when writing an academic paper. And then from there, that's like when you have to get creative and like think about things. And I think the conclusion is probably one I struggle with, not necessarily in content, but because everyone likes something that's like pretty and like wrapped up and like, then your professors are like, how does this apply to like the real world? And you gotta like think about ways to extrapolate. So probably in answer to one of the first questions, a way that I know when my writing is finished is when I finally have a conclusion that I like, because as much as I am rewriting and revising the whole way through, I know that I have a conclusion that sounds good and fits the paper at the time that I stumble upon it. And there's really no other magic other than that. It takes a long time, but I think for here, what I led off or I concluded with was more of a question about how might we treat food and eating differently if we looked at nutrition differently, and we looked at calories as energy. And so that was easy in the context of what I wrote about, because the focus wasn't to explore that part in itself. Like that's the project that has yet to come, that I hope everyone thinks about after. But that is also what I wanted to impart, because I wanted to give the strong like implication that the matters of importance between nutritional eating, social eating, and so on aren't really about looking at ingredients, and they aren't looking about the ways that we think about food traditionally. It's about those deeper rooted things and those sentiments that culturally we might not even be aware of, in the ways that we experience certain word associations and the ways that we think about like underlying currents of energy. I don't know.
Cool. Great. These were great answers. Thank you so much for participating in this first iteration and maybe the last iteration of an online writing symposium. Hopefully, it can go back to being in person
Hopefully,
next
yeah,
year.
yeah.
But thank you again so much for participating. Hopefully, we'll get this up online soon.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.